Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Chanteau, and I just want to check and make sure that we are on. So I'm going to do that in a second. I'm going to talk today about how we repair broken trust. If you can see and hear me, please post in the comments. Let me know that you can see and hear me. Hearing is really the important part because I can go check if I can be seen, but I can't check if I can be heard. And then I'll wait for confirmation before we get started. And if you're watching this later, please type replay in the comments, let me know. And I'd love to learn something fun or quirky about you, so put that in the comments as well. And I'll be putting comments on the screen during the broadcast. So if you prefer I don't share your comments, let me know that as well. I'm gonna go check on the face brain. Make sure I'm live. I need to reload. How y'all doing out there today? There I see myself. So if you're here and you can hear me, please let me know that in the comments. That is what I'm waiting for. And we'll get started as soon as I get that confirmation that you can hear me. So the weather here has been cooler. We had sprinkles and it's kind of windy. Hi, Tom. I'm glad you can hear me. Great. Okay, let's get started. So first, in order to talk about repairing trust, we need to define what trust is. And I use two perspectives to think about trust. The first is the most important, and that is that we have to have sufficient power. Oh, hi, Elizabeth. Yay, you can hear me too. So we have to have sufficient power to protect ourselves in order to trust someone. So you can think about like in a tyranny, it's very dangerous in order to do anything that you want to do. And there isn't trust, right? So if there's a threat of violence, it's very difficult to engage in any kind of trust. And our personal power is going to be a big source of how we know that we're capable of protecting ourselves. So we're really looking for that. And then we also need to have internal power. So we need to be able to, if we make a mistake, we need to be able to forgive ourselves and offer ourselves compassion for the struggle that we're facing, and also compassion so that we can embody our values. The whole process, like when we make a mistake, if we come down really hard on ourselves, we're spending all this energy on that self-judgment instead of generating the energy to power our learning process. So we're really focused on developing the power of the participants if we're trying to create cooperation. The second framework that we use to evaluate trust is the sincerity, competency, reliability framework. We call this the trust formula. And I also like to think about when I'm talking about competency, which would be a skill, a capacity. I also talk about capacity. So if somebody is overly busy, they could be skillful, but not actually show up for the situation. That is a little bit of a reliability thing as well. When people are capable of doing something and aren't doing it, sometimes it's because they're overwhelmed or they overpromised or something like that. So one of the things that happens with trust is that when I'm hearing about trust broken, so when people come and see me about broken trust, oftentimes there's problems because the person who is considered to be the one who have done the breaking will be trying to get to rebuild trust. They'll be trying to repair trust. And that process of wanting to do the things that are necessary to repair trust are kind of against what people need to do in order to give trust. Because it, often repairing trust is another granting of trust. And what the person who is feeling hurt needs to do is actually recheck in with themselves and rebuild self-trust, figure out what are my boundaries? What do I need? How do I take care of myself in this situation? And then we can start to think about what are we willing to engage with this other person around? And that process takes time. And usually there's like, we're also dealing with the hurt. We're dealing with integrating the hurt and forgiving ourselves. And the other person is, wanting us rapidly to forgive them and to move on. And that difference in agenda, like difference in where people are at, can often, the pace difference can often produce more breakdowns. So we need to make the whole process of repairing trust more expansive, so that it can take more time. And in order to do that, everybody needs to have sufficient power to take care of themselves. And, when we're more entangled, it's more difficult. The more entangled that we are with somebody, the more that our life is at risk, or our home is at risk. It feels like housing insecurity, things like that, that can really agitate, can create more pressure on the trust acknowledgement and repair accountability process. So, helping people understand that we have to build trust with ourselves again. Oftentimes when trust has been broken, there's a like, how did I let this happen to me? Why did I trust this person? There's like that kind of self-judgment can be going on. And so people will need to shift how they're relating with the whole trust building, the whole trust giving process, and with themselves. So that is a very important part of the whole thing. I don't try and build trust across a relationship between two people when the person doesn't trust themselves. That's one of the things that is critical. So people will hold on to defensive stories because they don't trust themselves to hold their boundaries. When we have a negative story about somebody else, it can hold the boundary for us. So if that person is toxic, if that person is dangerous, then we have to stay away from them. And that can help us to hold the boundary that we need to hold. If we have a more compassionate, big picture story, we might not take care of ourselves and our needs. So building self-trust that we will hold a boundary anyway, regardless of whether or not somebody else is worthy of trust, that we'll take care of ourselves, is a big part of how people can build self-trust. So things that we can do to build self-trust: we can identify and set appropriate boundaries and then enact them. We can create minimum standards for behavior, environment, and language. We can make a plan for what to do if boundaries are repeatedly crossed. Single instances might call for clearing held feelings and stories, whereas repeat instances might involve needing to move our bodies further and further away from the person or take longer breaks. Fight internalized oppression that's in the way around the boundaries and minimum standards, and plan for what to do if the boundaries are crossed. So I'll give an example for this in a second. Uproot any life-draining beliefs around this topic and replace them with life-affirming, non-dual beliefs, and I'll talk about that as well. Gather enough power to be autonomous in decision-making and self-care, and develop embodied wise adult consciousness and the ability to recenter after we get flooded or thrown off. And we want to build skill and capacity and self-forgiveness and the ability to recover from harm and trauma. So that's a pretty strong list, right? And we can imagine when, if people are desperately trying to repair trust and like get back to normal, it's very hard to actually pay attention to these things that are that we need to do in order to reestablish our own autonomy. So I said I would give some examples of these things. So dealing with internalized oppression around our boundaries and minimum standards might be something like holding a boundary is mean, or asking somebody to fulfill on their commitments is harsh. And oftentimes people around boundaries can get into that kind of language. And they're trying to, get back to a good feeling. And that good feeling, forcing that good feeling actually isn't going to create it. It's just an idealistic, sometimes people will forgive and forget, but basically they're just giving up on doing any change practice. They're just going to try again. And And that giving up can be very destructive to self-trust, and it can be destructive to mutual trust. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it was a one-time mistake and the person doesn't make it again, and there's no problem in going forward and letting go of trying to make any changes. But in reality, when we are dealing with a situation that feels like it's broken our trust, that we feel in some way like our our power or our integrity as a person was harmed. Uh, Taking the time to actually figure out what happened, figure out what we want to do about that, and how we want to relate with ourselves going forward, relate with situations like that going forward, what kind of plan do we want to have in order to take care of it. That all takes time. And so a rush to like quickly repair is almost certainly just bypassing, right? So um life draining, and I also said I would talk about life draining beliefs and life affirming non dual beliefs. So, a life draining belief is something like, it doesn't matter anyways, or I don't matter anyways, or you're not going to change. So, it doesn't make any difference what we talk about, or it doesn't make any difference. Like, we don't, I either have to accept you as you are, or, um, or leave. Right? That kind of thinking, that is, we're giving up the potential for a change to actually be powerful, for us to gain in power, or for the other person to gain in power. And that might be true. It might be true that nothing is going to change. It's more likely to be true if we don't do anything to create a change. And if we don't actually believe in change, if that's definitely a life draining belief, that nobody changes, nothing changes, and it doesn't make any difference what we do anyway. So we might as well, either stay together or break up, like whatever. um, and we are operating within a very structurally oppressive system. So those structural oppressions are opposing us, right? Like we're dealing with a kind of a constant assault on our dignity and well-being. And the idea that we can't change within that structure is very convenient for the oppressive structures. We not believing in change is extremely useful to maintain the status quo. And so, for sure, a life affirming belief is that change is possible. For me, um, change is magical, is life draining, versus change is something that can seem magical because of the way that we do it. We can make change seem magical, but making it like it just happens outside of us, making it something that isn't about the way that we respond to our experience, I find that very disempowering. So we want to find something that is life affirming. So for me, like a life affirming belief around change would be something like, systems of oppression are operating. They are disempowering us intentionally and on purpose all the time. The way that individuals are able to make changes primarily comes from our ability to accept the unacceptable and to offer ourselves self-compassion, so that we're wasting the minimum amount of energy on any kind of regret or despair or loss of self-trust. That self-compassion and accepting the unacceptable produce the maximum energy available for change. And that can make the changes that are possible seem magical, because as we stop struggling with ourselves, as we stop being harsh on ourselves, we gain energy, and we gain that energy on behalf of our future self's ability to respond in the moment to something in a different way. And we can think about what we would like to be able to do, what we have done, and what we want to be able to do, and what we will do. We can plan for that. We can build skill around that. We can practice that, and we can create the potential for that. And that is actually how change happens. So that would be for me. It's not saying, oh, I can snap my fingers and change. It's not saying that if, I can't snap my fingers and change. It's saying that that act of seeming like I snapped my fingers and changed came from a state of readiness that I built in response to an incredibly oppressive structure that was trying to disempower me all the time. I got completely off topic. I'm on page 2. There's a lot of material here, so bear with me. I'm sorry if this goes long. Okay, so now we get to the trust formula. The trust formula says that someone's sincerity plus their reliability plus their competence and capacity, that's what makes them trustworthy. I said that already. So once we have enough power to trust and we still have trust issues in a relationship, the trust analysis might help us understand where trust is weak or diminished. So I'm going to give a long example using this one relationship. Hi, Sierra. Oh, hi, Nona. Good. I'm glad you all are into it. We're like, everybody take a moment. This is intense stuff. Okay, so I'm going to give this, there's this couple I worked with at length, and I helped them quite a bit. So I'm going to use them as the example. So I'm calling one person Helen, and she at one point refused to believe her partner's story. We were trying to clear held feelings, and she was like, I just don't believe you. So I pulled the meeting apart and worked with Helen for a little while to really understand where she was coming from. And once we got to the point where she trusted herself, she was able to admit that her partner's story might be true. That was huge progress. But she insisted she didn't trust him to tell the truth. So we did the trust analysis. I said to her, do you think he's sincere? She said, yes, he means what he says. Do you think he's reliable? He's reliable in his actions. He does what he says he'll do, but his memory is atrocious. I don't trust that he will remember everything he needs to tell me so that I will feel safe. Okay, that's one way in which you don't trust him around his memory. Do you trust his competency, his ability to do what he says he will do, and his capacity, his availability to do what he says he'll do? She said, again, in terms of actions, he's generally competent. He has availability, but I don't trust him to stay engaged with me when we're fighting. So then he dissociates and becomes a victim to my aggression, and my ability to communicate gets shut down by his inability to stay present. Okay, great. So you don't think his memory is reliable. He dissociates and shuts down when he gets flooded, and you would need to see progress on both those fronts in order to trust him more. She said, yeah, that's it. Okay, so now we understand there's something very clear that can be worked on instead of this vague, I don't trust you, right? The trust analysis helps us focus our attention on exactly what's bothering us and helps us get very specific about what we need to do in order to trust another person. So for this situation, I'm calling the man Jack. I invited him to write down everything about the stories that Helen was concerned about. They were, in this case, his sexual history. I suggested he write them all down, review them with me, and in the process, do everything he could do to keep the information relevant and accurate in terms of time frame. I actually had him write it in a journal, and I had him put space in between every incident, because he was basically creating a sexual history for himself. And I had him put pages in between so that if he remembered new things, he could add them. Once he was done, he was able to share the stories with Helen, and then he had the document somewhere available so that if a question about the past came up, they could check his written account against what he was saying, because there was a real problem with him saying, no, that's not how it was. No, that's not what happened. Oh, it was like this, or I did this, and then actually I remembered and I didn't do that. Because he would get flustered. So his memory became less of an issue because the memories were written down. The process took a while. It was definitely a thing. When it was complete, Helen declared satisfaction. She finally felt like she knew what his history was and that there weren't going to be more surprises, and that she could actually handle a surprise if it came up. And then there was this whole topic of dissatisfaction. So I worked somatically with Jack until he could stay present in a conversation, even when it was emotionally charged with anger. Helen eventually was able to declare satisfaction with his progress. And when I asked him about it later, he said it was really hard to be distrusted for so long. But when he realized he could do something about it, even though it was still disappointing that trust didn't come automatically, it was a relief to know that the distrust was not infinite. When he finally gained Helen's trust, he was proud of all of his work and much more grounded and centered in himself. He had gained power through the process. Oh, hi, Sarah. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so when we're considering trust, we want to think about the domain of trust. For example, if someone says, I don't trust your driving, that's a pretty global statement of distrust. But if we identify that we don't trust the other person's driving when they're handling their phone at the same time, that's a very specific type of driving transaction. We can make the request that they turn their phone off before starting the car, or that they allow the passenger to manipulate the phone if it's necessary for directions, or that they pull over. From a specific transaction, we can identify the context and make requests about 100% of what we want, and we can make new agreements. And there's one more thing I did with this couple to help them repair trust. We created an exit plan. So we talked about how they would exit, what they would say to enact an exit. Their fights could be super intense and involve strong, exaggerated statements like, I'm so done with this. The fighting was scary. So I helped them each figure out how they would exit. And part of that was making sure Helen had enough money saved so she could have somewhere safe to go if she needed to leave to recenter or take a break or to start the exit process. These kinds of rehearsals and plans for the worst case scenario are really helpful. We figure out how we can protect ourselves internally and externally if something goes wrong. Life is hard, sometimes overwhelmingly so. When we do our best to show up for ourselves in the challenge, we build trust in ourselves, and then we can trust others. Okay, so how y'all doing? I am about to go into the section on increasing anyone's power. And like I said, if you all have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. I can either stop and answer them, or I can come back and give you a question and answer section at the end. There seems like there's a little bit of a delay on the comments showing up. So, or you all are a little lagging behind me. So I don't know. I think I jump ahead when you all actually have something to say. Just need to give you a moment to ask your questions. Okay, I'm going to go forward and we'll see if anything comes up. When someone doesn't trust another person, often we need to increase their self-trust and their power. And when I'm talking about increasing power, I'm talking about types of power as we outline. Julia Keller talks about it in the power chapter on pages 38 and 39 of Access to Power, a radical approach for changing your life. So structural power, we'll start with that. So does the person have enough money to support themselves? Is their housing safe and reliable? Do they have any transportation issues? If they're employed, is their employment secure? Is there enough food? Is the person getting enough sleep? Cultural power sources. Does the person have enough education? Is their ability to speak the local language sufficient? Do people understand their cultural environment well enough to navigate social and structural obstacles? Do they have sufficient social capital to access community resources and support? Do they understand their experiences of systemic oppression? Are they able to access collective action against oppression? Do they fight individualism and the over-personalization of systemic oppression? That was a huge sentence. Let's see if I can. So let's see. Do they understand their experiences of systemic oppression? So do we understand how systemic forces are disempowering individuals? Do we understand how to come together as in a collective to join in groups that are fighting against oppression? Are we able to understand how our individualism isolates us, how that isolation can create mystification around what the truth is, and that by over-personalizing our bad experiences, we can end up taking responsibility for the ways in which we're systemically oppressed? So that maybe is a little bit better. I think it's still like maybe too big. Gigantic, multi-syllabic words here. Okay. Contractual power. Does the person have a contract that protects them? Do they have access to legal or regulatory support? Transactional power. Does the person have the power to ask for 100% of what they want? Does the person have the power to protect themselves in everyday transactions? Does the person have enough energy and power to be cooperative? Personal power. Does the person have an accurate self-assessment of their own power, or do they go one down when interacting with others? Is the person able to deal with their judgment and criticism, whether of themselves or others, and locate themselves in their embodied wise adult consciousness? These are all potent resources. So when we're trying to rebalance power, we address power in interpersonal transactions at great length. So things I might do to rebalance power in a transaction: I might name all the sources of power affecting each of us and discuss which ones are harder and easier to deal with. I might set different times or check-ins depending the order for how long somebody might check in, or how long they have, or whether or not they check in, or when they check in, depending on what feels better to each person. We reduce the pressure to be equal through neutral structures, like equal time, and increase a sense of equality through attending to the person's rights rather than their power as the source of equality. So if you have unequal, imbalanced power structures, and you create neutral structures inside your healing environments, you are reproducing status quo power dynamics. So we're really trying to dismantle that. So to create flexibility in the way that we structure things inside of our cooperative environments. We use consent practices to ask for feedback, make offers, change the subject, check in for satisfaction about the nature of the conversational style, and not just the content. So that's a meta conversation. And also, consent is definitely something that the way that it's taught comes out of a lot of white spaces, often in our, in the kind of social justice, normative, Western progressive conversational spaces. And so I'm also really attending to what would be an alternative cultural norm that people can be learning into, leaning into. And sometimes one of the things we talk about in partner blue stance, for example, is that close embrace is the default embrace, which doesn't involve if you ask somebody to dance, then you're saying yes to the close embrace. And having all this consent about touch is actually not culturally normative. So you want to make sure that you're not setting up my culture is the right culture. And we want to do that around cooperation as well. We're not insisting that people communicate our way and reproducing neutral structures or reproducing status quo power dynamics. So we might use a structure like radar or the Triforces, cooperative communication, to shape conversation and the response. We can take other cultural influences to agree on a structure like that. And we might have a meta conversation to determine what kind of conversation we want to share. Okay, so that's the material I had prepared. I'm going to open up for questions in a second. I just wanted to share with you the reason I'm here having this Facebook Live is because I set myself the audacious goal of training 10,000 trainers by 2031. And in order to achieve this goal, I'm offering a cooperative communication practitioner certification program starting on May 31st. And there's some bonuses that are coming up. So this Saturday, that's tomorrow, at 9 a.m., Thea Beeling and Torin Lee are going to be doing the first bonus, a pod call to talk with people about how they're going to be launching their either cooperative communication practice or cooperative communication program. And the idea is that we're going to help you figure out your niche and your offer, your language that appeals to your ideal clients, and that in doing that, you'll be getting ready to make your coaching offer or your your practitioner offer or your program offer. The second bonus is a call with me on Saturday, May 29th. So that's next Saturday from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Pacific. And right now, the teaching team is offering a free 20-minute strategy session between now and Friday, May 28th. So if you're interested in participating in the course, I'm going to put a link in the comments that gives you access to the strategy session. And that, we're really focused in this program on helping participants launch their practices or their programs. So if you want to help people as a practitioner or facilitator work through their life circumstances to understand them cooperatively, figure out 100% of what they want and negotiate, this is the course that will get you started. And I'm going to also put a link to a lot of this material today came out of my Power and Trust writing. I have a Patreon post. Oh, and my patrons, thank you so much if you are a patron. And if you're not a patron, I love having people join and follow me. And there's a community conversation that goes on. So I really appreciate all of you. And I'm open for your questions. So Sarah has a question. Will the Saturday 9 a.m. pod call be available for replay? Yes, to the people who are eligible for the bonus. No, if you're not eligible for the bonus, you don't get the replay. Any other thoughts or questions? I thought I was worried about how long this was gonna take, and it took a little longer than last time, but, we're right about there. Any other questions? I have a so good from Sierra and fire from Sarah. Um, Nona has a question. So you might have touched on this, but is there a way to identify when trust is being weaponized internally? Um, if we have trouble letting go of a situation, we're probably holding ourselves accountable to some way in which we should have protected ourselves from our experience. Um, when we can't forgive ourselves or the other person, um, and oftentimes it seems like that other person did something so horrible. Uh, I have every right to be angry. We don't recognize that we're holding ourselves to having exposed ourselves to that. So something like, why didn't I see it coming? How come I didn't protect myself better? How come I didn't stop sooner? How come I didn't fix it? How come I trusted this person in the first place? I never should have trusted them. That kind of internal weaponization is what I would be very often when people are struggling to let go. I will imagine that there's some kind of self-forgiveness issue going on. And I wrote something about self-forgiveness and letting go, and I can post a link to that in the chat as well. But if you give me a more specific, I could give a forgiveness statement. I'm, used to doing that kind of thing, like imagining what are the things that we might need to forgive ourselves for in the situation, in order to be able to so in an individualized culture, we are trained to blame ourselves for situations in which we are powerless because because we find ourselves in a situation that feels dangerous to us. That danger, uh, when we're infants, danger and powerlessness are exactly the same thing. And so we react to feelings of powerlessness as if they're dangerous. That triggers off our fight flight response. That gets intertwined with our dualistic internalized oppression, where we start to think that I did something wrong. There's something wrong with me. I should have fixed it. How come I didn't fix it? I should be able to figure this out. There should be a way for me to get out of the situation. And that kind of self focused thinking in an individualistic culture really binds us up around what we could be doing in order to respond to the situation differently. And that's why I talk about self-forgiveness, self-trust, and self-compassion being so important to the change process, because we have to accept the unacceptable about what happened, that we, for whatever reason, didn't protect ourselves from this situation, probably consciously. We probably knew that we were taking a risk. We were risking broken trust on behalf of the possibility that it would work. And we really wanted it to. And that, faced with that situation again, we might still not have the power to enact the boundary, or choose to enact the boundary even if we did have the power to enact it. We might actually expose ourselves to the risk again. We might actually choose to get hurt again because we want the benefits of that choice. And being able to really accept the unacceptable about that, really forgive ourselves for exposing ourselves to hurt in order to get the potential benefits, that is hugely important in order for us to be able to make a change in how we're handling a situation, especially if it involves doing something as strong as moving our body away. And people will often think like my choice is either to move all the way away or to just forgive and forget. And I don't actually hold that that's true. I think even moving your body away, like somebody says something and you walk 3 feet away from them, it's huge. Most people don't do that. If you walk to the door or walk to the step out of the room and say, I'm so upset I can't be in the same room with you right now. I don't like how you're treating me. I don't like what just happened. That is a huge change. If we take time, if we say, like, I know that we're going to be able to get past this, and I'm going to I need some days. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take 3-day break, and I would like a no contact 3-day break so that I can really recenter myself. And at this point think I'm going to be coming back, but I'm going to take that space because I really want you to get how important this is and how big it is. And I really want you to be using that space, if you can, to think about what happened for you and what you're like, what are you capable of doing differently? Because I'm going to come back with a strong sense of what I want. And I hope you take the time to figure out how this happened on your end and what you want. Because if there's something that you're doing that, or you need to ask for, or some way that what we're doing is not working for you, I want to know that. So this kind of like, we can take shorter breaks. We have this cultural story that says a break is a disaster. And a break is crucial. We have to be able to take breaks. If we can't restore our nervous system, we're operating with so much less function. We have so much less capacity to have novel, original responses to our circumstances from a flooded fight-flight response. You know, the percentages of our cognitive function that's offline, it's over 60% offline during a fight flight response. If we continue to let ourselves be perturbed in the fight, and we don't actually let ourselves calm down, we don't have our creative selves available to us in order to rebuild or create a different solution or make a change. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is restore our ability to be creative, our ability to be responsive, our ability to generate a new option for ourselves and for the relationship, for the dynamic. You said makes so much sense, and also growing pains. Yes, it's so good. I appreciate your questions. Anyone else have a question before we complete? You're welcome. Thank you, Nona. Okay. Well, this was my series on cooperative relating, communication, and trust. And I hope it was helpful to you. If you want to learn more, please sign up for the strategy session. There's a lot of questions there. If they don't apply to you, just, only fill out the questions that make sense to you, and hit the send button. Because if you don't ever hit the send button, we can't respond to you. And we'll have a conversation and see whether or not this is a good fit. And if not, I would love to continue to be in the conversation with you. I'm sure we'll be doing more. And I haven't decided yet what, if I'm going to do this again next week or what, but I have had a lot of fun. Thanks for being here. Sarah Russell says, thank you, so helpful. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a great day.